I'm Michael Previte. I'm the co-founder, CTO, and SVP of R&D at Element Biosciences. I think most people, when they talk about DNA sequencing, think that the error is actually only the sequencing part, like the sequencing box, when you think about the different technologies that are available today. But in reality, the front end of sequencing, which is the library prep and DNA extraction, and the back end of sequencing, which is really the aligners and the variant callers, have their own introduction of errors into the system. And so, while you can get the highest accuracy on a sequencing system, you're still only as good as your weakest link. So DNA extraction is such a wide array of different sample types that you can get. The different sample types can be forensics, which could be old bones. It could be, FFPE, which is fixed frozen paraffin embedded tissues. And there could be, blood samples, there could be saliva samples. And so extracting the DNA from those different samples uses different techniques depending on the age of the sample, depending on where it's coming from, whether it's blood or tissue. And those will impact the actual DNA itself. And if it's a harsh condition, it could depurinate the DNA or deaminate the DNA, and that can create issues that you'll read out on the back end of the sequencing. The library prep part, after you've extracted your DNA, is getting the DNA prepared to put on a sequencing instrument, whether that be a PacBio instrument, or Illumina instrument, or an Element instrument, or an ONT instrument. So the library preparation is basically preparing the DNA such that that DNA can potentially be captured or read through with the technology you're using. That requires you to add adapters to the end of the DNA that you've extracted. It requires you, first it requires you to cut it up in small pieces and then add those adapters, and then basically pull that down to the surface of the sequencing system that you might be using. And in those preparations, you're using enzymes to modify the DNA in order for you to be able to read it with whatever technology you've used to adapt it to that. So library prep itself, while less harsh than the extraction techniques, also can introduce errors. If you introduce PCR in terms of amplifying your signal, that will introduce errors that will propagate through your DNA sequencing. And that's only so your PCR will introduce its own type of errors, and those will be picked up from your sequencer that you will think came from the sample, but it might have come from your library prep. When you start to stand up and become more accurate and on the short read technologies, where you start to reach 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 errors, then you start to get into a realm where the surrounding pieces start to matter more. And in our case, when you look at our data, we introduce PCR-free Q40 plus data, which is, our data on average is coming out at that PCR-free is Q40 plus, some Q45. We were very hesitant to introduce a metric for our specification that said Q40 plus at 85 or 90%. And the reason was that we could say it for PCR free, but we knew that basically if a person used a different library prep or extraction technique, they would pull that into our sequencing box, and our quality would not be able to stand up to the quality of the sequencing instrument. And so if we had stated that, yes, we're Q40 plus at 85%, we couldn't state that for all of the applications that people use the sequencers for today. And so it's really important for us to be accurate as a company and to be accurate as a technology, but also we anticipate that sometimes you don't need all of that accuracy. So on the library prep side, you can introduce quite a bit of error, and some of it's from the PCR enzymes. If you're using PCR, they introduce error. On the back end, now when you have a very high amount of quality, the alignment mechanisms also can create some artifacts in error. And then ultimately, when you get your alignment, then you have to do a variant calling, and those variant calling is all stood up based off of prior learnings, that a lot of them probably are Illumina based. And that, creates other artifacts for a new sequencing system that would come through and have to go through those aligners and variant callers. There's a lot to accuracy that really matters. And really at Element, our goal was to just clean up the sequencing system as best we could. And, obviously now we're finding that, there's other areas we've got to clean up as well in order for people to utilize this quality and understand what they can use it for.